What is war to you?
It is, I think it's final for a lot of people. And it is also, I think what is lost, and this is, again, about the culture we have, I think, in this country. War is almost always painted as like the begrudging necessity rather than like the horrible outcome of our collective failed humanity to like, just live with one another, right? Like every war is a failure, every war, but we haven't, we come up in a culture where that's not how it's framed.
Right.
It is almost always framed as like, this is the thing that we have to do.
Welcome to 250 Years of Servitude. This is a limited series by the Black Veterans Project, part of the Dark Green Report. My name is Kamau Ware, and I'll be your host. Honored to be here with you. Would you mind just stating your name for everybody to hear?
Yeah, Kyle Bibby, Marine Corps veteran, 7 years in the Marine Infantry, living in Brooklyn now, but originally from Jersey. So
Jersey, Brooklyn, that makes sense. Yeah. And so we were just kind of chatting a second ago. Who did you meet first in the Black Veterans Project set of co-founders?
So Richard and I were both students at Columbia. And we were in grad school at the School of International Public Affairs. We met through what's called the SEPA Veterans Program, and then SEPA Students of Color. So this is like a student of color union, as well as like the Veteran Student Union.
Okay.
And that's where we were just friends, hanging out, knowing all the same people.
Right. So. And who did you meet last?
Danielle, actually. So. Which is ironic because we both went to the Naval Academy. She was in the Navy. We know some of the same people. I was in the Marines, but the Naval Academy commissions for both Navy and Marine Corps. So I chose Marines a handful of years ahead of her, and we actually met through Richard. And Richard had brought on Zella, who I met when we were the first few years, like just really figuring out the DNA of the organization, what it is that we actually want to do to help this community, right? And really just and achieve repair for veterans.
Right.
And as I was transitioning out into my role at like Common Defense and a couple other organizations doing veterans work adjacent to that, that's when they brought on Danielle to kind of like backfill my position and really just help also as a new founder. So I think she was always really there from the beginning, but like became more involved as I kind of stepped away in that first like year or so.
So Richard, Zella, then Danielle, but you and Danielle already kind of had some connections, but just didn't kind of come to the surface.
Yeah, it happens
every Naval Academy.
Yeah, every so often there's like a person that we both know or something like that. So, but I mean that's generally like the Black Officer Corps in like Navy or Marine Corps, especially for service academies specifically.
Right.
So.
And why did you choose Marine?
Oh, yeah, what a decision. So I was a young guy who wanted to go and be a Navy fighter pilot. And then I started growing up a little bit, realizing
that the Top Gun effect, or
I mean, Top Gun was cool. Aircraft carriers seemed great, and then I get to the academy and I really reckon with the fact that pilots have much longer commitments than somebody who's on a surface ship or in the Marine Corps. And I was already, the Naval Academy is a tough place. And I remember thinking, do I want to make a commitment at 21 to be a pilot for absolutely no less than 8, but probably maybe 11, possibly 13 years. It's a big commitment to make at that age.
Right.
And I had already made the commitment of joining the military, which was a big commitment at an even younger age, right? So it was starting to catch up to me a bit. And that's when I thought, I do actually like this Marine Corps stuff. I kind of like being out in the field. I kind of like the, just roughing it, the machine guns and the tanks, and like, it just in the moment as a young man, it just felt also like something that was really exciting.
Right.
And the contracts are 5 years instead of like 10 or whatever.
Right.
So it seemed to me that I was like, this is a safer choice for me. To really like hone in on a career that, if I don't like it, I can at least like serve my time honorably and then transition on to the next part of my life.
Right.
So,
yeah, Marines, I think that the Marines probably had, I don't know if it's commercials, I don't know if it's video games, but I feel like Marines have like the most like, I don't know, like it has like swag, Quan?
They have the best.
What is that?
The best PR department. Like the Marine Corps is very good about, they kind of have a way of, okay, if you watch the other services, a lot of times the Air Force, they'll wow you with the technology. The Navy does that a lot too. The Navy also like makes it seem like everybody can go and be a Navy SEAL, right? Then they get guys coming in, they fail out of the, they don't like to admit that. But that's kind of,
was tough.
the Navy is very tough, but it's like, I think they play up the SEAL thing because they know a lot of guys might come in, try, fail, and now it's like, okay, well, we have a nice destroyer for you to work on, right? The Army, a lot of their commercials are about benefits and, like, hey, essentially they're offering you a path to the middle class if you're a working class person. The Marine Corps is different. They're like, hey, we're really tough and I don't know if we're a good fit for you. Like they want you they want you to kind of be like, well, I think I could be,
Right.
So,
you had me at hello.
Yeah, it's like they're very, they entice you with the allure and the esteem and the culture.
Right.
And, it's not uncommon that I tell people I was in the Marine Corps and I hear all sorts of like, oh, aren't they the first ones in? Oh, those are the crazy ones, right? And I'm like, I mean, we're not really any more or less crazy than anyone else. We do have traditionally a specific mission. But a lot of it it's branding, it's culture, that is built within that institution to attract the people they want. And it is a way I think that they have been so successful in recruiting and getting certain people to join the Marines.
And some of that recruitment, I feel like, and once this is a question more than a statement. Do you feel like of the various branches that the Marine Corps has been more like gamified for like civilians to say, cool, I'm going to play this game and feel like I'm a Marine, or the commercials kind of give you a sense of like, be like this hero. Like I feel like it starts early. I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and this is, I think, even a broader conversation than just the Marine Corps. I think when I look in retrospect back at my life, like my favorite cartoon growing up was the Transformers. Yeah, it's great, right?
They're fire.
Yeah, and I remember, like, as I got older, recognizing I was really obsessed about this show where robots are in a civil war, and it's like, and it's still a little militarized, right?
Right.
And I think that through this, it sounds silly, but I think that warmed me to the idea of like military service and all this other sort of stuff, and they turn into tanks and airplanes and all sorts of stuff that it's cool for a little kid, but it also, it's a really soft entry point into like the military lifestyle and what might entice somebody to, like I said, for me, I chose the Marines because I was like, hey, I think machine guns are kind of cool. I think, it's kind of fun to shoot that, right? You get a way in via that. And it's not just that, obviously G.I. Joe and all these other things. It definitely starts young. And I think there's a famous Marine Corps commercial from, I want to say maybe like the 90s, where it's a guy who's sword fighting a dragon.
That's what I mean, about the hero.
Yeah. And, so there's definitely...
I remember that. It was lit.
Yeah. And he beats the dragon, and then once he beats it...
it turns into...
Yep, the uniform snaps onto him, and it says, the few, the proud, the Marines, right?
Right.
I mean,
who doesn't want to be down?
And that's their target audience, young men who want to feel like heroes, and... or, honestly... young people in general who are, like I said, trying to find a way to the middle class, right? You can't really, I think, have a conversation about recruitment in the military or who is enticed by not also talking about the hard socioeconomic realities of the people who are drawn there, not because they want to fight a dragon with a sword, right? That might make them, that might help them choose what service, right? But for some people, that's the way that they can get out of maybe a town where there weren't that many opportunities.
Right. Let's stay with the Transformers for a second. Let's imagine, how would you define war to a fourth grader who plays the Transformers?
Oof, that's tough. I mean, it's...
Beyond Starscream, taking an L from Optimus Prime, like, what is war to you?
It is... I think it's final for a lot of people. And it is also, I think what is lost, and this is, again, about the culture we have, I think, in this country. war is almost always painted as like the begrudging necessity rather than like the horrible outcome of our collective failed humanity to like, just live with one another, right? Like every war is a failure, every war, but we haven't, we come up in a culture where that's not how it's framed.
Right.
It is almost always framed as like, this is the thing that we have to do.
There are dragons, and they gotta get it.
There's a dragon and it has to be killed, and instead of like
the dragon wanted to talk.
Instead of like, how did we get here in the first place?
And that wasn't like a door that was nailed shut, because you have a great deal of respect for people in your family who also you weren't just somebody who had no knowledge of military service.
Yeah, my grandfather served in World War II. I had an uncle who served in Vietnam. And I mean, I think this is kind of the story. I mean, so many people's that's their family.
Yeah,
right?
same here.
Like,
My grandfather.
Almost everybody, especially the further back you go, when there were massive drafts with like millions of people being called up.
Right.
We have a smaller volunteer force now, but even now, people know somebody typically, maybe a cousin or something like that, brother-in-law, something. So I think, for me, I did have an element of my family. My grandfather was like larger than life, and he was a World War II CB. So CB is an interesting kind of like dual name. CB, literally the letters, construction battalion, is oftentimes turned into C as in ocean and B as in like the bug bee. And it's because they're builders. And bees build like hives, right? So their emblem is a bee with a machine gun and like, hammer or something. And they're kind of known for being tough. I think their motto is they build and they fight. So that was my grandfather, and he was a sanitation worker, and he just, we had a family in East Orange, New Jersey, right? Working class family. He had 7 kids, right? He raised a family with my grandmother. And I think that was for me the first time outside of the societal framing of war as like this necessity, this begrudging necessity that we have to go to war sometimes. It was framed through the people in my life,
right?
And there's an irony too. I think my uncle, who he passed away a couple years ago.
Condolences.
We didn't have the closest relationship with him after Vietnam, and I think it was because, like a lot of people, his experience there, he didn't have the best experience in Vietnam. So, there's so much in like our own lives directly that really hint at what is this bigger project at Black Veterans Project, right? Like finding repair for Black veterans, ensuring that they're getting the services they need. And, it's a problem for all veterans, but, of course, one of the main things we talk about is how acute it is and specific for Black veterans, and oftentimes planned, right? Like it's purposeful for us. So I wasn't ever really able to figure that out with my uncle, but I wonder sometimes, like, to what extent these things I work on now might have impacted him.
Right. No, it's like you have a mission, and you were born into it in many ways, but also like from like Transformers to the movies to 50 Cent being tough too, right?
Yeah.
There was a bit of like a machismo of like this is a path to manhood.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think at the time, what did it for me, I do think those things help frame, like you said, machismo. And I think as a young man, I was looking for a way to validate myself as a man, right? And I think that's the reason why, honestly, that whole like, hey, the Marine Corps, like it might not be a good fit for you. You might not be able to make it, right?
Challenge.
Like, for a young man, it's like, I could do that, you know? And I think that might have probably did lead me to like accepting the Marine Corps a little later after my initial like desires to be a Navy pilot. But, I think what also did it for me, just to be frank, is like I grew up in Jersey, 9/11 happened, and I do remember it being a traumatic day, and everybody went through trauma because of 9/11, right? Especially in the city and outlying parts. And I think for me, I felt what felt like such a stable, controlled, and safe world all of a sudden didn't feel safe. And I think for me, I somehow rationalized that like the way for me to regain safety or control was to join the military, which is, kind of a crazy thing to think now because you don't have control in the military. They make the decisions for you. Even as, me, I know you mentioned I had enlisted. I actually, I was an officer technically, so I was commissioned, right? Which is a slightly different thing.
Please explain the
Yeah.
difference.
So enlisting is the typical way that people join. So you just show up at a recruiting office, you sign the papers, it's a contract, and now you
Right.
agree to serve, you owe them time, and they, give you a role in the military.
Okay.
Being commissioned requires that you have like a bachelor's degree. The training is a little different. They're sometimes held at different places. So like I mentioned how Danielle and I both went to the Naval Academy, that's a
Right.
commissioning source. Now, it's not, for the sake of this discussion, we're going to talk about like military stuff. We could be specific. Generally, I don't really, specify because
Right.
typically it's like I still signed a contract,
Right.
But legally, I guess the difference is that as an officer, you get a commission. You are responsible for a unit typically, or some sort of like special level of responsibility. The traditional distinction being officers are kind of like white collar jobs, and the enlisted jobs are more blue collar. So.
No, that's we're the audience for this podcast is going to be people who are veterans and not in civilians.
Yeah, distinction matters. Yeah.
And so I think that I'm a word nerd myself, and so I think that understanding like building a lexicon around empathy and around action matters, and I think that it's useful. I just learned something when you think a bit about Black veterans. There were Black veterans who fought with the Royal Army, Black veterans who fought under General Washington, and both were looking for freedom, looking for middle class or looking for movement. But we're also at a very particular context in 2026. So in considering, what Black Veterans Project is aiming to get accomplished, how are you looking at this moment in time to think about Black veterans and history and how you're channeling your service through this project?
I think what comes to mind for me about this project, this moment on the 250th anniversary and all, is cycles, right? Seeing how things that happened in the past are repeating themselves. Sometimes good things repeat themselves, but right now I don't see that. Yeah, right.
That's nice.
But like right now I feel like we're moving through a moment of backlash against Black presence in pretty much all of our institutions, including the military, right? And this isn't the first time that's happened. We've spoken before about the Black veterans who served in World War I and the roles that they were allowed to serve in under the French.
Yeah.
Which essentially were full combat roles, the Harlem Hellfighters, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of the regiment out in Chicago. I mean, there's all of these combat units that were in sustained deep combat with the Germans, and they come back and they feel like, I don't want to hear anything about white supremacy,
or be told I can't have water from a water fountain.
Yeah, it's like we fought, against one of the greatest armies in the world, and we beat them, and I think that it is not accidental that moving into World War II, the disposition was quite different for Black service members. It was, we don't want you in any combat roles. We'd rather you be in support roles, and maybe we'll have a little combat role here and there, be like a tank unit here, some Tuskegee Airmen there. But the breadth of an entire regiment of men who are taught to fight, Black men, it's just not happening. It's a political decision. It was a backlash, I think, from that moment, and I do feel like we're moving through that now. But I will say, I am always, there's this weird, it's kind of conflicting, but when I look at the history of Black people in this country, and also on top of that, the history of Black people in the military and how we have, flowed from military service to literal community defense at times, right? Like from real threat in our homes, in our community.
Right.
I can't help but feel very powerful, but also humbled because it's such a long history.
Right.
I could feel individually powerful because that is our heritage, that is our story.
Right.
Right. But then there's the moment of like, it's a big story.
Right.
And I'm a small part of it, and we're hoping Black Veterans Project obviously could be a big part of it too.
Totally. So. And so what is like your main role? There's 4 co-founders. Like why are you a co-founder? What are you bringing to the team?
I started as a co-founder. I think I might have been the first person with Richard to have a conversation about Black Veterans Project, where He had been going through his issues with the VA, and I can't remember how the conversation went, but I remember us kind of having the conversation, and at the end being like, well, we do have these policy degrees. Like we had just gone to policy school and we're like, I guess we can do something with that,
Right.
and we'll like start a nonprofit. And again, that was the beginning of these years long journey. Zella came on, Danielle came on, and, this years long journey of us defining what it is that we do, which led us to today, where
Right.
now I'm co-founder, but I'm also co-CEO with Richard. We have 3 lanes and a 4th kind of silent one. The first one is impact litigation. Second is our narrative hub, and then we're building out like a movement building arm to do advocacy. So to be a bit more specific about those, the impact litigation is around essentially suing the VA and other government agencies for the discrimination against Black veterans. The narrative hub is where we collect, curate, and tell the stories of Black veterans, and those stories end up being themselves small little doses of evidence to support the lawsuit.
Right. Case studies.
Yeah, and then the third lane, what I do is a bit more of like we're going to build out this advocacy arm, our ability to collect with the community, build power, and put some mass behind these demands that we have of repair from our government and from our community, and then that 4th lane is also just the day-to-day running of BVP, this Black Veterans Project. So Richard and I split that. He typically runs the narrative hub and is overseeing our inputs into the litigation, and then I'm working on the movement building and advocacy stuff, as well as the like general organizational health and like growing the organization, scaling it.
You are listening to 250 Years of Servitude, a podcast by Black Veterans Project. My name is Zella Vanier. I'm a co-founder of the Black Veterans Project and an Army veteran. To learn more about our work, check out blackveteransproject.org.
So what does this look like, let's say 10 years out?
Oof.
You're activating these 3 pieces, these 3 different pillars. Once again, we have like a big moment now of like reflection. It's going to look different. It's going to be private. It's going to be national, international. I've been reading articles about all these different ambassadors in different countries having big parties for the U.S. birthday, But in this moment, how do you see riding through this moment of memory and like pushing those pillars and those agendas forward? How does this look? Because we can go back to you like at 15, right? Let's jump forward 10 years.
Yeah, I think, first in 10 years, Richard and I have both talked about this. Neither of us want to still be running BVP. We want to hand it over to somebody else because we think, he and I have both worked at other organizations, and we've seen just in our experiences sometimes what it could be like if founders stick around a little too long, so we want to be really cognizant of that. But it's also, it's kind of a warm porridge thing, right? Because you don't want to leave too soon, and then this vision that you had and this and the info that you gained in the years of building this
institutional knowledge,
that it is,
and relationships,
it's lost, right? So you do want to find that sweet spot. I think for Richard, he says it's probably in a few years for him. For me, I think it's a little longer. But in 10 years, we won't be running BVP. We would want to transition it to something that has a robust board that supplements all of the major inputs, people who understand, like historians who could help us with the proper curation and like display of this history to the community.
Right.
Funders and financial bundlers who could keep the money flowing, right? Lawyers who could give us the good legal strategy to ensure that, we're going through the right routes and the right strategies to get the restitution for these Black veterans. And of course, just like service members themselves who have the lived experience in the military, military family members too. We call this the Black Veterans Project, but really this is a Black community project.
Right.
Like as we mentioned, so many people have family members who served in the military.
Right.
And these benefits would have benefited the spouses, the kids, everyone. So, and in many cases, the spouses might not even be Black people, right? So like we're talking like a lot of wealth that has been taken from families. And and a massive footprint. So we want to see that reflected in our board. We want to see that reflected in our operations. And in 10 years, these lawsuits can take a long time.
Right.
I can't remember exactly how long the Black Farmers lawsuit took, but I know it was over 10 years, So, who knows what it'll look like in terms of where we are with some of the lawsuits that we're thinking of. But I would like for us to certainly have maybe like a Black Veterans Brigade of like people out in the community who can activate, tell this history, and also just be good stewards of the community. I think there's a component of what you do after your service in the military. Sometimes you can serve in the military and you can feel like maybe my service wasn't really as beneficial to my community as I was hoping it would be.
Right.
Maybe Black Veterans Project can be a place where we can remedy that, where, the skills you learned in the military in terms of leadership and organizational culture and things like that, maybe can lead you to be a better organizer for the people in your immediate space.
Right.
Not having to go overseas.
Right.
So I think those are the things that we think about and what we would like to see.
Sounds like a home of sorts,
Yeah.
but also like a place to like continue service, but also like gain skills.
Yeah, we want to train people, absolutely. The way our currently that we're looking to set up our membership is affiliates who,
Right.
people who could follow the program, engage with us at a distance a bit, donate money or sign on to a petition. But then we also have like our veteran advocates and the veterans themselves, even if they're not specific advocates, who we want to tie them more directly into the work. And some of that is finding the ways to train them on how to maybe talk to media in their hometown, right? It isn't just a federal issue. There are fights for restitution for Black families and reparations for Black communities at the state level. I think the famous examples like Evanston in Illinois and other places, right? That's local organizing. And
Right.
some of that, it might be better suited for us to supply some of the support and skills to these local folks and let them run it. We don't need to
Right.
come parachuting in.
Do you find that people think veterans and reparations and they're like a world apart?
Oh yeah. I think I've had conversations with people that I served with. These could be white service members from more conservative backgrounds. And I think that there is something about when you frame it around military service, it is such, an egregious crime, really. And it is something that is treated in America as such a sacrosanct, like a career and service, to know that people could have been denied what was due to them after they sacrificed so much.
Yeah.
It's horrific for a lot of people. And I do think it reframes for a lot of folks what our community has been talking about in terms of what reparations could and should look like.
I think that I applaud you, and I also appreciate that distance between like people who think and support veterans, but also think like, oh, but these are veterans who are like organized, and they're telling us that there's been like almost to some degree like a bank robbery. Like people have served and have not, they passed go and didn't get the $200. They passed go 3 times. The generations have passed go and haven't gotten their $200.
Yeah.
And so I think that's it for me. I think that's a bit of a narrative shift for folks to even consider that a veterans organization could be so focused on something like not just reparations, but like repair.
Yeah.
So I think there's so many different types of veterans organizations that I think that this is a unique space from my perspective.
Yeah. And I think, I don't maybe want to use the word lucky, but at least I would say it benefits us that it is not difficult to get people who serve to understand that there's problems at the VA, right? And that there's problems with, I will say personally, I don't like beating up on the VA because I think the number one problem with the VA is that it's never been properly funded, right? Our government has never taken truly seriously the fact that you should be investing properly into these veterans hospitals and into veteran services. And really, tied in that is a broader conversation around public health in the country altogether, which we don't need to get into that today. But I think there is something about the current status and disposition of veterans in this country, feeling left behind regardless of race. And then when you add in this context of like, you know, let's talk about the veterans who came home to Jim Crow policies, literally, in places like Mississippi, Louisiana, other places like that.
Fighting for their life again.
Literally, moving into a racial terror state,
Right.
right, after fighting for their life in Vietnam or Korea.
We like chalk it up as racism, but
Yeah.
it's not like there's levels to racism, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's levels to racial violence.
Yeah.
Which is why when you think about people who fought and served World War I honorably decorated and then they're getting lynched in their uniforms, that's, you know, we're not like making comparisons and contrasts. However, you got to consider like what's that like for that veteran versus somebody who just stayed put. You know what I'm saying? Like that person has put themselves in a position to get far better treatment. And, you know, it's wrong in both contexts. But I think that's part of how we even get to, I think, the civil rights in many respects, is people come back from serving, like with the civil rights era, the first one, Civil War.
Yeah.
Those are civil rights, the first civil rights.
Yeah.
And people still were like, okay, cool. You had like seven or so years, and then it's like, here comes some violence.
Yeah.
World War I, cool. Here comes some violence. I think that's kind of why we even get to the 1960s, where it's like we got to really make these amendments make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes me, you know, it reminds me of, you know, just my emotional journey through this work sometimes too, right? Because when you can frame it that way, which is, you know, how we see it as well, like, you know, I mentioned the length of this legacy and the depth of it. Yeah, it's so big, and how it's unfortunately cyclical, right? Of harm and then neglect of the harm, further harm, and then, you know, periodically we can rise up and like still grab something, or, you know what I mean? But it's a cycle of us having to deal with this. And I know that sometimes within that, it could feel, it could drain you, right? It's easy to become pessimistic because of it. But I think what has grounded us in this project is that it is worth it for us to do this work regardless, even if we never get our restitution, even if we can't get the perfect repair. There is something about doing this work because we are owed it, and we have the dignity and the honor within ourselves to demand it. Right. And to say to the entire world, stake a claim and say, we deserve something.
Right.
And even if you don't give it to us, you know, we deserve it, and you all know it now.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you have each other, you know, 'cause I think it's not something one person's supposed to carry all that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, there's a big element of us, you know, I've literally said this with my therapist, which is that like when you do liberation work for the community, you also liberate yourself, right? But you gotta, you know, pull yourself out of it too. You know, take your time, right? It can be a lot to hear these stories, and you know, I'll give an example. When we did a trip to Mississippi to a city called Holly Springs, and we met with the veterans there, and I found myself oftentimes being a bit emotionally overwhelmed because their experiences were so much like my experiences. And, you know, they had lived these good, honorable lives. These are good, you know, good Christian Southern families, you know, most of them. And they just, they deserved more than what they got. And they're still making ends meet, you know, they're still living. They still have community. They still have beautiful families, you know. But there is an element of like, you know, me looking at, with them as they tell their story, what could have been had they, you know, had access to these things that other people got access to.
Right.
And I think that for me, you know, it can reopen wounds for myself about my own service, and you know, and even them telling their stories. They can tell stories of trauma. I watch them reopen the wound for the sake of, you know, ensuring that people know that we existed and that we deserve something, and we were wronged. Right.
Yeah.
And that request for repair itself is like, it's literally the first step in repair, right? Like to demand
acknowledge.
it. Yeah. Acknowledge and demand it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I kind of go into like a rabbit hole a bit. So I think about how central, like we're like steps away from Wall Street, you know, steps away from City Hall. And I think about the Declaration of Independence being read on July 9th, and how in 1783 Treaty of Paris is signed, but like black people are like leaving in ships to go to like, you know, Canada, with the British, and how that was like a mass emancipation of sorts. But how like a lot of people that fought on the Continental Army that were black were not given their freedom. And so going back to these cycles, I mean, it's painful to kind of have the gravity of you're addressing a wrong that is older than our country.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's a perfect example of, you know, what we got Du Bois here in one of these books, right? Like, you know, he talks about that double consciousness,
yeah.
and you know, like I won't say that I don't like celebrate the 4th of July per se. I get some days off, but I also understand that, like, you know, we're talking about independence from a king to which, in my ancestors were still enslaved in what I believe was Virginia, right? You know, Virginia, North Carolina, Tidewater area, right? So what is an Independence Day, a day of freedom to me, you know, and you know, it's why, you know, Juneteenth has really kicked off so much, like, you know what I mean? Like, and
it's a wild time in the summer.
Yeah.
Spring.
Yeah, June's a great month. But yes, I think in general though, we you know, we move through this in a way where the country can talk about this. Will they acknowledge, you know, that obvious contradiction?
Yeah.
I think, you know, the way it looks now in our country right now, it's on our community to acknowledge it. I don't know that we can rely on the government to do so in an honest way, right? Which is really what this is all about, you know, in the micro sense with this conversation, but also in the macro sense with this project, right? To like make sure that our story is told, because they're not going to tell it, you know.
And why do you say the government won't tell the story? Just to give us a timestamp. We got to name names, but why do you think the government's not going to say, hey, we want to apologize for not giving black veterans their just due in 1783 and for continuing that cycle?
You know, it's for the reason why we got to sue them, you know, because if you admit that the harm took place, now we need to have a conversation about restitution and repair. You have to, right? And we've got all the evidence about the harm.
Yeah.
You know, we have it for the Black Veterans Project in terms of, hey, we know that in these years there were studies by the VA that said that there were discrimination and they buried it, right? Like, we know that we have the data ourselves now because of the FOIA requests we did. But also at the bigger sense, you know, there's so many resolutions at the UN about like how African people have been treated in this country, right? How the transatlantic slave trade has been. I think they recently just
2 weeks
voted.
ago.
Yeah, it was like one of the.
No,
if not the greatest. Yeah, it was the greatest crime in world history. You know, and you know, but I guess nobody did it. Right? Like where you know, so if you do that though, you open the conversation about the most dangerous thing I think you can do in America, a potential wealth transfer to black people. Right? Oh no. You know, so that's why it doesn't happen, and that's why we got to sue. That's why we're going to court, you know, and we're going to court for the veterans specifically. But you know, we're in a broader movement of our entire community that has demanded this restitution. So, and we're proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, I want to make tangible to some degree your service. We talked about people centuries ago, and we talked about you and being 15 and becoming a Marine. Can you talk a bit about your service, like what you did as a Marine, just to kind of give people a sense of like, you know, so all, you know, everybody who's a co-founder, they can, you know, have that education of like, okay, this person did this, that, the third. I think a lot of this empathy needs information. Yeah, it's hard to empathize without the education.
Yeah. So I went to the Naval Academy in 2003. Like I said, initially I wanted to be a Navy fighter pilot. Chose instead Marine Corps, or really the Marine Corps chose me. And then I went off to what's called the basic school. That's where you learn to be a basic officer. I did, I think, a little too well on some of my field missions because they chose me for the infantry, right? We call them like patrol exercises and all this. I distinctly remember one where I did really well, and I didn't want to be in the infantry. This is the irony. Like, I actually wanted to be a logistician or intel. You know, I wanted something I thought might be more transferable if I chose to get out. You know, I was trying to keep my options open.
Right.
Infantry's pretty like, I mean, your job is literally locate, close with, destroy the enemy. You got machine guns, you got missile launchers, you got rifles. It's just, you just hitting. Right. You know, like, and I didn't necessarily, it turned out that like I'm really proud of my time in because I learned a lot about myself. And, even through my deployments to Afghanistan, I was also on the 13th MU. That's a Marine Expeditionary Unit acronym there. So essentially a bunch of Marines on ship, and they, in case something happens, they send you in. That's what's off the coast of Iran right now, right? Those are MUs.
Okay.
I served in those spaces, and I could say that I felt so lucky that at the height of the Afghanistan war, as we were like tapering down the Iraq war, I always deployed with all of my Marines, and I came back with all my Marines. And even though I tell people often that I think everybody gets a little trauma in the military. The question is how much, why, and how, and all that. But ultimately, I do think I had about as good of a term of service as you could get. But it opened up a lot of questions in my mind, right? To end up in the infantry, I had to focus on combat, right? And I'm in Afghanistan in patrol bases, interacting with the populations and really learning more about what it really means to be at war for America, especially in a war that over time, Afghanistan started in response to 9/11 with a mandate that seemed pretty honest and just. Yeah. And then 20 years later, we leave and everything falls apart in 90 days. What happened, right? We could see it. As Marines that were there, we could see that this will probably fall apart, So I think that was my experience, this mix of emotions of, frustration that I ended up in the infantry, but then gratefulness of the friends I made and the experiences I had. And I mean, I will tell you,
home together.
Yeah, I mentioned before, like being a young man who was kind of like looking for a way to kind of prove myself to the world, the Marine infantry will do it, So like I definitely got that at plus some, but I think the biggest thing I took from it was a deeper understanding of the world, a deeper understanding of like how our society functions. And it really changed my politics, my worldview, and certainly I think set the stage for what Richard and I and Zella and Danielle, all of us as founders, ended up starting with Black Veterans Project.
Right. You've all got different set of skills that are baked in, and you're like, once again, you have each other.
Yeah.
So people listening to us are going to be like, civilians like myself, veterans like you. What is something you want to share with them? Because part of this is creating a conversation that's necessary. I think that I think it's more recent than old. I know World War I, there was some debates, between like Du Bois and others had their camps of like, hey, serve, don't serve.
Yeah.
Then after things came back, people was like, oh man, maybe we shouldn't did that.
Yeah.
The archive reflects that tension. Yeah. But what would you want to share with people who are veterans and civilians at this moment in time when it comes to the conversation between people who have and have not served, enlisted or commissioned?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the audience that we're looking to speak to.
Yeah.
And we need each other.
Yeah, I think on that moment with Du Bois, where he talked about getting Black men to join in World War I, that thought process being that we will demonstrate that we have a stake in this country.
Prove our medal.
Yeah, and prove that, we deserve these, I think there's baked into that like a problem though, right? Like we always deserved it and trying to prove to someone who is as irrational as a white supremacist, right? And that's what we saw when they came back. And I do think, I can't make a decision for people on what service can and can't look like. I get this asked often about like, do you think people should join the military still right now? I don't know if I could look at somebody who has like nothing going on in their town and really feels like this is the right way for them to just get out and they could maybe get into like this Air Force postal, relatively safe career that could turn their life around.
Right.
But you could also end up like me and accidentally end up in the infantry, right? I don't know if I can make that decision, but I will say this. I think in this moment, it's difficult to look at where this country is going and feel good about military service as someone who's a member of the Black community. So I think, one of the takeaways I would have from this is, let's break the frame of service being, I get it all. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Right.
How about I think nurses, I think teachers, I'd be thanking teachers. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I remember thinking for a little while, maybe I'll be a teacher. And then I thought about it. I was like, that sounds terrifying, right? I just got out of the Marine Corps and that sounded terrifying, right? So I think, let's think about what service could look like. And, certainly for this project, for the Black Veterans Project, we find ourselves in community with racial justice organizations,
Right.
with veterans organizations of all types, with reparations organizations,
Right.
with good governance and democracy organizations. And we're in space with them trying to solve problems and make life better for people. And the biggest thing that I've learned through that is everybody has something to offer. So, I would say that to the folks who, are listening to this or who are interested in the Black Veterans Project. Maybe you're not a black veteran yourself. Maybe you don't have any family members that were veterans. For this project, this is about making the community right. We have set out a challenge that if we can solve the problem of repair for Black veterans especially, we will have proved that actually an equal protections and equal access democracy can exist.
Right.
Right? It'll be one of the ways for us to prove that. Everyone has something to offer for that. So
Right. That's powerful. I share that dream with you, and I'm rooting for you. And so I do thank you for your service, both with this project and prior to.